HIV that is a victim of stigma and discrimination, we have so many other diseases. Of course, it is not only diseases. You can have stigma and discrimination in terms of food, and also in terms of people, in terms of race, in terms of culture. And I'm sure you people here in IAS have noticed that coming to the Philippines, and you notice it's a different culture here. But anyway, so mental illnesses, I'm sure we realize that in some ways there are some stigma and discrimination. For instance, physical abnormalities. I don't know how you perceive what is your stigma and discrimination for a person who is a dwarf, or a person who is a giant. Or there are some cultures that actually say that if you have an absent philtrum, you have actually this grove that is here that is called philtrum, you actually are a witch. Or if you actually are cockeyed, then it's very easy for the devil to communicate with you and be easily possessed. So I don't know, because those are just some of the things that I have learned, and maybe in your own culture you have all of those stigma discrimination. In fact, it is just an abnormality of the fusion of what we call the middle section of your body, you see. And of course, we know being cockeyed is because your muscle, there's an abnormality in your muscle which is supposed to balance the pulling of your eyes. But anyway, we have so many of these stigmas, like for instance, in the case of leprosy, I had worked actually in Yucca Mission Hospital, which is a leprosarium, and I tell you, we had our share of what we call lepers who were stigmatized. When they were sick, people would just actually put them in a certain area and even just put the food and not even draw near to them. They would put the food and then the individual would only come after they have already left the food. Obesity. What is a stigma for obesity? I think we feel that people who are obese do not have any control in their appetites, which is wrong. Well, sometimes maybe it's true, but it's not entirely true, because there are diseases that actually contribute to obesity, like for instance, hypothyroidism, or maybe what we call Cushing syndrome, which is an abnormality in your adrenals and other things, you see. Of course, mongoloid. When we see a mongoloid child, what type of reactions do we have? And we think, oh, I think this is a inherited disease, when it is not really an inherited disease. It is because the mother had an abnormal, what we call, chromosome. And similarly with stigma and discrimination in HIV, and I think it is even more pronounced with stigma and discrimination, and I'm going to discuss that. Primarily, number one is because our wrong perception. Number two, it actually deals with something very intimate in us, which is our sexual relationships. The fact that we don't discuss about sex, you see, then we are afraid to discuss about it, so that is already a taboo. So let's go, okay? And of course, there are some diseases which have what we call positive labeling or positive stigma and discrimination. I don't know what is your perception, but having lived in Africa, I know that in many tribes they considered diabetes and hypertension as a disease of chiefs. Only chiefs actually get that disease. Why? Is because they are the ones who eat the good food. Not only that, but the chief's business is to listen to people. He just sits down and listens to people come up with their problems. So his lifestyle is eating and sedentary lifestyle. But these days, because of the same lifestyle which most of us are having, we are now having what we call the disease of the chiefs, you see. But in a way, it's a positive. So people, oh, diabetes, sure, you're rich to be able to have that disease, okay? Stigma and discrimination, okay, you can look in any dictionary and all of them have similar, what we call, definitions of stigma and discrimination. A mark of disgrace. It's just like putting a mark on you. Okay, you are a thief. Okay, you are actually immoral, you see. It is something that is actually causing disgrace and to cause shame in the individual, okay? But that is not the only definition of stigma, according to the National Health Institute. Stigma is also negative labeling without sufficient evidences. And that's the problem, because when it comes to HIV, so many people do not examine the evidences, okay? Now, if you are going to think about how we have treated Ebola, that is really a form of stigma, if you really think about it. I've been to Liberia, and I've even seen some of these makeshift hospitals that they had made in order to have patients admitted. And imagine you are going to be treated by a doctor having these full, what we call hazmats or space suits, completely covered. Now, would you like to be treated like, you say, Doc, look here, you're actually discriminating me by putting all this suits and protection gear. But nobody is questioning that. Why? Is because there is sufficient evidence, you see, that Ebola is very, very contagious. And so, as they are going to be isolated in a separate ward, as they are going to be treated by doctors who are actually in full gear to protect themselves, yet we don't say it's stigma and discrimination. Why? It's because it is a reality. Ebola is very contagious. Not only that, but the fatality rate of Ebola is between 65 to 90%. That means if there are 10 patients who are going to be infected, only one is going to survive. The good thing these days is because of the advent of supportive measures, like giving IV fluids and proper care, it has gone down to 65. But yet, 65, that means out of 100, see, 6 are going to die. I mean, 60 are going to die still, even with that good take care. So we do not make that because it is clear that there is scientific evidence that this is really the procedure that we should actually undergo. Okay, stigma refers to attitudes, and that is very important. What we think, what is our frame of mind, what is our belief. And because of that belief, then you have now discrimination. If you think that a person is highly contagious, that is in your mind, even though it is not true, then you're going to say, oh, I have to withdraw from this person. And that is true. We have actually seen members of the church who are even afraid to hug people with HIV, afraid even to sit in the same pew with a person whom they know who has HIV, you see. So these are just the forms of stigma and discrimination, okay, name-calling, finger-pointing, labeling, infectious or immoral, and then judging. What would be the first question that you ask if you found out that the person is suffering from HIV? What is the first question you ask? Got it right. Immediately, how? Immediately, because why? You immediately jump to the conclusion that it was actually an immoral act or something like that, you see? But if you're going to look into the example of Jesus Christ when he met the man in the pool of Bethesda, remember that story? On a Sabbath day. And he saw the man who was actually in his bed for 38 years. Did he ask the question, how is it that you become crippled? Did you have syphilis? That you actually had some problems that you cannot walk anymore? And it's true, syphilis can actually make you paralyzed. No. What did Christ ask? Do you want to be healed? Can I help you? And don't you know that it was really a moral issue why that man was actually there in the pool? Because Christ withdrew, and after he withdrew, and then the man is bringing his mat, and the Pharisees is asking, why are you bringing your mat? He said, well, the man told me to bring up my mat. Where is the man? I don't know, he has gone. And later on, Christ appears. And what does he say to the man? What does he say to the man? Theologians, come on. Do not sin again, or else something worse is going to happen to you. That actually shows that the man's sickness came from some of his actions, you see. But Christ did not say, how did you get it? He said, no, okay, take up your bed and walk, okay? So let me test your stigma and discrimination, okay? When it comes to HIV. Are you willing to send your child to a school known to have HIV-positive students or teachers? Are you willing to buy vegetables or fruits from an HIV-positive vendor? You can make your mental checkup, okay? Are you willing to eat food cooked or served by HIV positive? Are you willing to hug a person with HIV, okay? Well, I'll tell you, I bought vegetables, I bought fruits from people who actually have HIV. When I was in Botswana, I was actually taking care of people who were chefs in the hotel, and some of them were waiters. And sometimes as I eat in these hotels and into the restaurant, I see them. Oh, hello, how are you? Okay. And I'm together with my family. Okay, let's continue to eat. Okay. Are you willing to use utensils used by an HIV-positive individual after being washed with detergent and water? Do you feel ashamed to have a relative sick with HIV? Are you willing to wash the feet of a person with HIV? Do you think HIV is a curse from God? If you answer just one of these, that means you have some form of stigma and discrimination. If you had answered actually 3 yeses, you have some serious form of stigma and discrimination, because it's okay. You can actually hug, you can actually buy food. There's no problem sending your child in an institution whose teachers and students have HIV. They are not going to get contacted with it. And this is the reason why we have this office, is because one problem that we are facing, which one actually person calls it, scientists, is the third wave of the HIV, okay? Stigma and the pernicious effects, okay? The pernicious results. Number one, people are refusing to do tests, and I have come up, when I see patients, I say, I think you're actually, I suspect that you're suffering from HIV, and you know what they say? Doc, I would rather die than have a test. They're afraid, yeah, because why? They're afraid people will talk. I tell you, this is a true story, it's a true confession. One day, here comes a general to my clinic. It was in Botswana, well-dressed, and together with 2 bodyguards, and said, Doc, I want to have a test for HIV. I said, okay. And at the time, we don't have any protocols that we are supposed to do what we call counseling, because you never know what is going to happen for the test. And I was confident, seeing that this is a general, he was very healthy. I said, okay, let's do the test. We did the test, and we did the test, it was positive. And now I tell him, sorry, but it's positive. And I also forgot to tell him that he should have a confirmatory test. As I said, these were the first days of HIV. I tell you, when I first came to Botswana, I could see that the records of this patient, all the doctors had suspected that they were suffering from HIV, but none of them were brave enough to tell them, I think you have HIV, you should be tested. They would just tell him, oh, you have diarrhea, oh, you have pneumonia. They were just concealing everything. But anyway, so this general, as I said, we have learned a lot. And so this general says, okay, thank you so much. And I didn't know that the general, after I did a test, actually wanted to kill himself. Good thing, before he decided to kill himself, he said, why don't I do a second test? It was negative. Can you just imagine? See, we are learning of these facts right now, you see. Counseling is very important. Number 2, you should have a confirmatory test, okay? And now, as I told you, so many of the patients whom we suspect are afraid. And because we suspect that they have HIV and yet they don't do testing, they are going to infect others. So it's not only individual, but it's also going to be others. Okay, this Jackie Chan tells about how it is going to affect children, okay? Refusal of treatment. Why? It's because if you go for treatment, people can see you lining. Oh, that guy is there on the line taking HIV. What do you think when you see somebody? For instance, you see your pastor lining up there. And I know some of these husbands and the wives have been complaining that their husbands would actually get their medicines, to take the medicines, because they're afraid to fall in line. As a result, people are not getting the right treatment. But here is the true story. I was treating a pastor. And at the time, HIV medications were not yet available free of charge. And some of these medications were at least $600 for 1 month. And so this pastor comes to me for treatment, and finally I asked him, I said, Pastor, do you go to the treasurer of the conference and report that you have this expense? He said, no. Why? It's because we had stigma discrimination. He was afraid that people will know. Well, it's good right now that there are free medications, but can you just imagine a pastor who is actually earning only about $800, and yet he is shelling out $600 for for HIV medications. That's why we better change our minds. Of course, wrong interpretation of Mrs. White and Dr. Sikwa had already explained about this, because some people, because of the wrong interpretation of medications, they even refuse to give medications to people with HIV. And I said, no, Mrs. White is against that. They are devoid of support groups. Okay? Not only that, but some of them are even having denial employment and segregation. That's the reason why we at the AAIM came up with a policy that you cannot discriminate, you cannot actually fail to hire a person with an HIV status. As long as the person is able to perform their work, then let them do it, even they're HIV positive. Okay. So it's two sides. I told you about the general. It's good he actually did a retest. But it's happened in South Africa. A white man, and in South Africa, they don't think that white men are going to have HIV. That's no in South Africa. Okay, black men, it's okay, but white men, no. And so one day, a white man came, laboratory, Lancet laboratory, and doctor actually did a test on him, and fortunately was positive. When he was positive, then he kept on deliberating what is going to happen, what people are going to say to me, when I'm going to start to lose weight, and all the community will see me, what are they going to think about me? So finally he gets a gun and shoots himself. A lot of suicide actually happening from HIV. Not only that, but the problem is that when you are going to commit suicide, you might even kill others too. And that has happened several times. I don't know if you story about the story of Versace. You know the designer Versace? And from the story, what actually happens is that his boyfriend actually killed him because they think he got the disease. The guy actually killed 4 other people before turning the gun on him. When he got HIV, he started to say, okay, I've slept with this, okay, so I'm going to kill them one by one. Okay? It's very important that we are going to have Christ's method with no stigma and no discrimination. But it is very easy to say, and yet it is very hard to do, because all of us have some form of stigma and discrimination, whether it's HIV or not. And you can do a mental assessment of ourselves when we are alone, okay? Well, we were able to come up with this document, a guideline, helps the guideline, but I tell you, it has to be an individual decision, you see, to process what we have. Well, Nelson Mandela actually says stigma is worse than the disease itself. It's not only Nelson Mandela who actually said it, but several people said it, and history has proven it. Okay, let's go. Slavery. It's one form of stigma, isn't it? One extreme form of stigma and discrimination wherein one race feels superior, and as a result, they actually exploit the other race. And that's exactly what has happened, you see. Genocide. Genocide is one extreme form of stigma. Okay? And we can see all of this actually, this stigma and discrimination. The Holocaust, 6 million people died. Cambodia, more than 2 million people died. In Rwanda, between 800,000 to 1.2 million people died, and they were just using machetes. All of these are actually examples of how stigma and discrimination can affect our way of thinking. Okay? And so we come up, stigma and discrimination, a concept framework, and I'm glad this came up, a publication by Horizons Population Council, May 2002. And it actually tells us about how stigma and discrimination has affected the landscape of HIV/AIDS. There are 2 main reasons for stigma and discrimination. Number 1 is fear of infection. That's the reason why people actually are afraid to shake hands, afraid to hug people, afraid to even wash the feet of people when you don't get HIV with that, okay? HIV is a life-threatening illness that people are afraid of contracting. Some people are even afraid to talk with people with HIV for fear that the saliva will go to them and they're going to get HIV. You don't get HIV with that one, okay? And the second one is a morality issue. And this is very important because the church is considered to be the guardian of morality. And of course, there are issues pertaining to morality, and we're going to also examine that. HIV-related stigma and discrimination are closely related to sexual stigma. This is because HIV is mainly sexually transmitted, and most cases of the areas of the world, the Endemic initially affected populations were sexual practices or identities that are different from the norm. Okay? So let's look into what we call a fear-driven response, because that is how we react when it comes to HIV. Because of lack of education, AIDS, discrimination, fear, panic, and lies surround me. Okay? How infectious really is HIV? That's the question. Do we get HIV by shaking hands? Do we get HIV when saliva falls on us? Let's see. These are the studies done. This was done somewhere in 2002. It was actually a Harvard book on HIV updates. There were a total of 20 studies in the United States, all involving body or body fluids. This all happened in what we call medical personnel. And this happened when there was still no antiretrovirals. These days, if you are going to be accidentally pricked or you are going to have accidental contamination, there are medications that we give you for 4 weeks, and it is going to help you not to get the disease. But at this time that the studies were made, these were not available yet. And so what they did is they made observations and find out, because in the United States, in the event that they got the HIV, they are going to be compensated. Okay, for instance, when it comes to needle prick, you know that syringe, and it is a hollow needle, and you can actually have blood as you are going to extract. Okay, so it's a hollow needle. Needle prick. There were 6,135 individuals, medical personnel, doctors, nurses, med techs, laboratory technicians, who were accidentally pricked, okay, with HIV-contaminated blood. What do you think was the outcome? Out of 6,135, how many who had direct contact of the blood got HIV? 20. That was already direct contact. Now, what is your conclusion? Is it very, very contagious, moderately contagious, mildly contagious, very, very low infectivity? What's your conclusion? Come now. Very, very low. Imagine 20. That's only 0.33%. That's not even 1%. Not even 1%, okay? Mucosal exposure, 1 out of 1,143. Mucosal meaning it goes to your eyes, it goes to your lips, maybe goes to your nose. And yet, out of 1,143, only 1 got it. Intact skin exposure, that's very important, because if you have an intact skin, it is going to serve as a very important barrier for the infection. 0. Okay? No confirmed cases with suture needle. Why? Suture needle is more of a solid. When you do suturing, it is not like the syringe where it's hollow, wherein blood can go in. And I tell you, while serving in the mission hospital, I got pricked. I had mucosal surface. And what do you think do I have right now? And there were no ARVs at the time. No post-prophylaxis exposure at the time. Thank God, I don't have HIV. I have myself already tested 6 times. I tell you, I got pricked while I was actually trying to help a baby who was HIV positive. The baby was panting for breath, had severe dehydration, so we wanted to insert a needle. Accidentally pricked myself. And as I said, at the time, there were no post-prophylaxis. Okay? Thank God. Not only that, but I was doing surgeries, and in that hospital, it is such a primitive hospital in Zambia, sometimes the suction machine would fail, and as I was doing cesarean, I would scoop the blood and put it in a bucket. Scoop the blood, put it in a bucket. If not, put the gauze, 4x4, and squeeze it. And by the end of the cesarean section, I was already drenched with blood. Thank God. I was not doing something full-heartedly, but it was because, you know, you get concentrated saving the life of a mother. I also one time, blood went into my eye. I tell you, thank God, I'm still negative, so praise the Lord. But that just shows you that HIV has very low infectivity. Now let us try to compare it with the others, okay? Because it's very important that you know this so that you can take precautions. For instance, if you get accidentally pricked with blood or body fluids, what are your chances of getting hepatitis? If the person is going to test positive, the blood, your chances of getting hepatitis is between 37 to 62%. That is quite high. But if the blood is negative, for instance, you get pricked with the blood, and then you say, okay, man, come, let's test your blood and find out if you have hepatitis, and it's negative. That doesn't mean that the person is negative. It just shows that the test was not able to pick up the hepatitis. Your chances is still 23 to 37%. Yet the blood is negative. How about hepatitis C? 1.8. HIV, 0.013. So can you see? We are afraid of afraid of HIV, yet there is a more sinister disease that we just take for granted. That's hepatitis B. That's why my advice to all of us here, as soon as possible, go to the clinic and say, can you please give me an injection of hepatitis B? Of course, first of all, they're going to test you, because if you're already hepatitis B positive, what's the point of giving you already a vaccine? 3 vaccines, and that is going to cover you for 5 years. After 5 years, you're getting only 1 booster dose. And I tell you, it's very cheap compared to if you get what we call hepatitis. If not hepatitis, cirrhosis. Not only that, but cancer of the liver. Because hepatitis B can lead to cirrhosis, which is the hardening of your liver. Not only that, but it can lead to cancer of the liver. And it can manifest itself between 10 to 15 years later. So I said I have actually attended to 3 pastors in Africa who had died because of hepatitis B. Okay? So let us erase the fear of catching HIV by hugging, embracing, casual kissing, eating utensils, toilet facilities, baptism, foot washing, mosquito bites, and others, because you don't get HIV because of that. Okay? But here is the HIV paradox. People are what we call conscious of getting HIV from mosquito bites. They even have all of these theories, or comes to needle pricks. But they are not afraid of getting HIV through sex. That's the general outlook there. I mean, pardon me for mentioning, but that's exactly what happened to Jacob Zuma, President of Republic of South Africa. He knew that the lady was HIV positive, and still he rapes this lady. Well, according to him, it was consensual sex. Whatever it was, consensual sex or rape, because according to the lady, she was raped. And you know what? Zuma just said, well, after I had sex with her, I just took a shower and that took care of it. And can you just imagine the type of philosophy that he is communicating to the rest of the population of South Africa by saying, by taking a shower, you're going to get rid of HIV. So, friends, it is very important. Number 2, the church as a custodian of morality. We know all about it, but that's the reference there. Isn't it? One of the main functions of the church is the custodian of morality. We have the 10 Commandments, isn't it? That's the basis of what we call morality. When it comes to pregnancy, if a single lady gets pregnant, the conclusion is no other, isn't it? She actually got pregnant because of premarital sex, isn't it? No other thing. You cannot have virgin birth, isn't it? It's only happened to Mary. Or these days, you can do actually what we call implant, which we have some also what we call ethical questions that we're going to ask about this. But when it comes to HIV, there are what we call non-morality issues. Number 1, innocent spouses. Spouses who are faithful, and yet because there's partners, whether it's husband or wife, is running around and they get the disease. It's not their fault. Revenge HIV. You know what revenge HIV is? Well, people who have HIV, they say, well, I'm not going to die alone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put my blood in a vial, and if somebody comes for injection, I'm going to withdraw some of that blood, and I'm going to give my blood to the person. It happened in Zambia. The nurse was caught after she had already given 150 injections. People see. Mother to child. Okay? Mother can give it to the child. Attending to accidents. And here to you pastors, because this is a true experience. I was actually taking care of a patient who was under antiretroviral treatment. And one day, this patient was riding a combi, and when she was riding this combi, she was riding together with the church pastor. And the combi had an accident. And of course, as a good pastor, what did he do? And this patient was bleeding. As a good pastor, what are you going to do? Just say, it's okay, and I'm not going to take care of you. Pastor actually helped her into the ambulance and got contaminated with blood, you see. And of course, blood transfusions. There are some stories here in the Philippines about how stigma discrimination was being practiced in our very own hospital, and when the papers heard about it, they were attending to a patient, but when they found out that the patient has HIV, all of them withdrew, and they didn't know that there were some people who had reported this incident in the newspapers, you see. So it's very important we should have actually Christ's attitude. Okay, for instance, in the Samaritan woman, we have so many instances in the Bible about stigma discrimination. Samaritan woman, she was discriminated in 3 points. Number 1, she was a woman. Number 2, she was a Samaritan. Number 3, she was a prostitute. And so can you just imagine when the disciples actually saw Jesus Christ, hey, what would you actually think if your pastor is actually talking to a prostitute? Hey, soliciting, eh? Jumping immediately to conclusion when in fact everybody should be helped, isn't it? We should reach out to the prostitutes. But what Christ did, I didn't care. This soul needs to be saved. He talked to the lady. Okay? Lepers, similarly, they were also discriminated. What did Christ do? He healed them. He touched them. Zacchaeus, tax collectors, similarly. Today, I'm going to your house. People say, hey, is he a prophet? Hey, people left him. Syrophoenician woman, isn't it? Syrophoenician woman following Jesus. Please heal my daughter. And actually, Christ at first ignored her. Finally, he said, well, it's not proper to give the food of the children to the dogs. How would you like to be called a dog? Totally discrimination, isn't it? And finally, Christ healed her. I said, okay, go away. The reason why Christ did it was not to emphasize or to do with stigma discrimination, but to show the disciples their attitude to what we call the Samaritans, to the Gentiles. Christ was actually showing. And can you just imagine, when Christ had finally healed the woman, and then the disciples said, I thought you also were practicing stigma discrimination. When in fact, Christ was just opening the eyes of the disciples on what are their attitudes. In conclusion, this is what we should do. Educate through scientific findings, how to eliminate stigma and discrimination. Remove the morality issue, because you see, not all cases of HIV are because of immorality. Okay, there are some innocent. And why are we going to assume what we call immorality when there are other issues that are at stake? Number 3, use Christ's method in dealing with stigma and discrimination just as he did to the Samaritan woman, Syrophoenician woman, to the lepers, and to Zacchaeus. Number 4, actual demonstration by those not infected to those with HIV. Have you hugged somebody with HIV? Have you eaten together with persons with HIV? Well, I have. That's what we have to show. Especially you as going to be pastors, you have to teach them, you see. Wash the feet of person with HIV. Yes. And number 5, infected HIV people who are infected, you can actually come up to give them testimonies, and that will be a way of helping. In the end, we would like to have actually towards zero HIV stigma and discrimination. So in the end, we are going to treat HIV just like high blood pressure and diabetes. Thank you so much.
Open for questions.
Thank you for that education that I think we all need. I wonder if you could help us, particularly since some of us may be administrators, at some point in life. You said we should not discriminate when it comes to employment, etc. But obviously there must be some kind of jobs where it would not be advisable to have somebody with HIV doing that kind of work, whether it's work in a clinic or with food or whatever else it might be. Could you perhaps just help us understand where, where it would be wise to be careful?
Okay.
Where it would be wise to be careful?
Okay.
Where it would be wise to be careful? 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 Where
when we say that you're not supposed to discriminate when it comes what we call to the HIV test, because you can be HIV and yet you don't have AIDS. That means you're able to function. And that is what is important. Is the person able to do the job? Because we don't, in fact, do what we call hepatitis B testing. Okay? And hepatitis is even more contagious, you see? So, as long as the person is able to do the job, but when it comes to what we call particular jobs, and I don't know how many IDEs are there here, but one of the things that are required for the IDE is to do an HIV testing. It's there. You go actually and look into the physical examination, medical examination from the General Conference, HIV test. Okay? And if you're not going to undergo the HIV test, then they say, well, you cannot be a candidate. Simple as that. Because there are certain jobs that would really require that you should be HIV negative. For instance, nurses who are working in the operating room. Can you just imagine what is going to happen if an HIV nurse is going to give her disease to a patient who's undergoing what we call surgery? It is going to be a big suit, lawsuit against the hospital. Similarly with surgeons, similarly with dentists, see. So in those cases that you're handling individuals who are handling what we call body fluids, who are going to be doing surgeries, definitely you cannot. And it's not only HIV, but it's also hepatitis. That is in the form of the General Conference. That's the reason why you have a medical doctor, so that the medical doctor can also advise. But when it comes to the classroom for a setting like this, there should be no problem, because there is no contacts with body fluids. Okay.
Any more questions? Stigma and discrimination.
Sometimes ago, there had been a sort of pushback from those who had HIV, or those who worked for them, not to call them victims. No, we are not victims. We are, and so my recollection is the correct term then, I don't know whether it is still the same term now, is people living with HIV/AIDS instead of AIDS victims. How do we classify them? How should we refer to them? AIDS victim? Are they victims? Are they sufferers? People who are sick? How should we classify them correctly?
Okay, you are right when it says that it is now PW, people living with HIV. So it's PLWH. It used to be actually H than AIDS, but it's no longer that way. What is important is that it's just the HIV, because not all people with HIV go to AIDS. It's very important also to discriminate between HIV. You can be HIV positive and yet you don't have AIDS. Because if you have HIV, it means that the virus is staying in your blood, but you may be positive with the virus, and yet you are not going to show any signs and symptoms. And that's it, because if you are going to take care of yourself very carefully, and that's what we did in the past when we did not have any ARVs, we just advised what we call lifestyle changes, food that they eat, no alcohol, no tobacco, and people really survive very well, you see? You know, when it comes to a virus, there are two types of viruses, okay, how they react. It's either they're a passenger, just right in your body, or they are the driver. And this is it. The HIV is going to be a passenger initially, but if you're not going to take care of yourself, it becomes the driver. It's going to take over your body. And similarly with hepatitis, first stage becomes a passenger, later on it becomes actually a driver. So with HIV, when you say HIV+, technically they have the virus, but they are not showing any signs and symptoms of the disease. And this is what makes it pernicious, because you look at the individual, they are very healthy and strong, and then After that, people are tempted, okay, I'm going to sleep with this lady, sleep with this man, you see. Okay.
My question has to do with how the church should handle cases of HIV/AIDS, especially with respect to people getting married. In my country, Ghana, when you are to get married, the man and the woman are asked to go for this test. And even before that, they will announce to the church that these two people are getting married. And in the event that they should cancel the wedding, people are having this preconceived mind that, oh, okay, maybe it is because one of them is having HIV or any bad or deadly disease. So how should the church handle such a case, especially in Africa?
It's a very good question because it's a very practical question which we have found all the time being asked. Now, as pastors, you're supposed only to advise. Secrecy of affairs, okay, you're supposed to advise. You should go and have HIV testing. Not only that, but there are certain diseases, like for instance, sickle cell. Not only that, but also hepatitis B. See? But it is not your right to know about the status. Just advise them so that they can make preparations. But at the same time, you have to prepare the couple and say, when you go for test, in the event that one of you is going to be positive, what are you going to do? Because even an HIV status is not a preclusion that you cannot get married and have children. These days, there are now medications that can help infected and infected partner. They can be together and remain uninfected, and also the child is not going to be infected. So it is no longer what we call a preclusion. Not like before, you see, that you say, okay, negative, positive, we cannot do that. No. Because you see, here is the problem. When two people are going to go together, and they are going to have themselves tested, and they have not agreed that the marriage is actually going to be dependent on the results of the HIV test. And then they go, and one person is going to be positive, and the other is negative. That means the other person now will know about the status of the other person. That is a violation of human rights. So you have to prepare them and say, in the event that one of you is going to be positive, are you going to continue with the wedding? And if they say no, you said, don't sort it out first. Then don't do the test. Because that would be a violation of human rights of the individual who is HIV positive, and the other person is already going to know the status of the other person. And as I said, these days, we would like to equip our pastors and tell them that even though one of the partners will be HIV positive, it's no problem at all. I mean, that's not a big deal at all. Number one, the uninfected partner can take medications, and this is what they call Truvada, which would help them not to take the medications. And of course, the infected partner should continue to take medications, because if you are going to take medications, your possibility of infecting the other person is very, very, very small if you have actually good control of viruses. Okay? And also preventing the child from getting infected. A very good case of this is actually Magic Johnson. You know Magic Johnson? Chicago Bulls. Okay, he got HIV. And he said, I want to have children. And that was the time wherein medications of HIV were not yet that very good. But the doctor said, okay, let's see what we can do. Gave him medications, Magic Johnson, and also I don't know what they did to the wife. Because you cannot have children if you're going to have a condom. That means you have to really not use any condom. Well, after they had sex, then they checked the wife. The wife became pregnant, negative. Now it was the child. He said, now let's look now what's going to happen with the child. Child was born, child is negative, see. And that was actually at the time where in Magic Johnson, the medications for HIV were not yet so good compared to these days, and they have actually very good medications, but it is only treatment, not cure. Okay?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I want to table a question that I've been asked that I don't actually have an answer to, and hope maybe you can help with that. At a camp meeting, a church member is seen taking HIV ARVs. This is an unmarried young lady, and by all intents and purposes, people now start to wonder. So now the question that is coming is, when we find a young lady pregnant without being married in the church, we call the church board because there is the reason for disfellowshipping and dealing with that. Now, she is taking ARVs, and we know that she has not always been HIV positive. Now she is HIV positive. Shouldn't we call the church board too?
Okay, first of all, let me I just got reminded. And this is what happens with pastors, is because I have seen some pastors, after they had requested testing, then they would like to know the testing. If they do not get the results, they're not going to do marriage. It's wrong, okay? Wrong. Not only that, but pastors, I've seen pastors, after they have done the ceremony, then they say, I'm glad to announce to you that this couple are both HIV negative. That is still wrong. That is actually violation of human rights. So pastors, please do not make that mistake. You might be caught and put in prison. Now, your assumption is that she got it and before she did not have any HIV. Now, of course, the assumption is and that same question actually came to me when I was the head elder in Botswana, and here comes a note and say, Pastor, what are we going to do with people with HIV? And of course, the mindset was that, assuming that they actually got it by immorality. But remember that you can actually get HIV. Number one, you can actually have HIV negative even for 2 years. It can actually happen, okay? Negative, okay? Number two, as I mentioned to you, you can actually get it by an accident. You can get it by revenge HIV, wherein you go to the clinic and somebody, why should we actually assume immediately? We become what we call judges, okay? So one day in Zimbabwe, while they were having discussion about this, then a young lady came up and say, who among your parents would give your sons to marry me? Everybody was shocked. Why is this now? I'll tell you, I'm HIV positive. Ah! Then the strict girl, well, maybe this girl is playing around. I tell you, I got it because I was taking care of my HIV patient, my HIV parents. See? She got it because she was taking it. That's the reason why we come up with this campaign, is because we would like to educate our church members to be cautious about the HIV, because sometimes you can get it. I remember one time a mother came in the clinic and the daughter was vomiting, and the mother was really catching the vomit with her hand. See? I hope I answered your question. Let us not assume. You know, God is there, isn't it? Okay? There are so many ways you can get HIV. Take care of patients, you see. Okay, any more?
Okay.
We don't want to decide about the time.
All right.
I'm having.
All right, thank you. I would like to find out, because some say that the HIV test is not reliable because it does not only target the HIV as such, but some say that if you are poor, you have no food, malnutrition, among the poor communities, you are more likely to test for positive. If you are stressed, you are more likely to test positive. So I would like to find out, because we have worked in Africa for many years, what has been your experience? Among the poor communities, are they more likely to test positive? And what is the relationship between the rich and the poor?
No,
Like,
you
for
see,
example, in sub-Saharan Africa.
The HIV test, there are actually different tests. One is the reaction of the body. You know, when a virus enters into our body is going to react and produce some what we call antibodies. Okay? And it is true, what happens is that if you are just going to use the antibody reaction, antigen antibody, when a person is malnourished, it's very possible it becomes negative because the body is not able to react. In fact, this is what happened with HIV. When HIV people come into the clinic, there are tests that the insurance requires us to do. Number one is doing hepatitis test, hepatitis B. And when we test them, because they're so malnourished, it becomes negative. But when we have given them nutrition and we have treated them that their immunity goes back, then they become positive later on, you see. So that's a known fact, you see. What we call is that, there's a term for that medical term. What do you know about it? What is the term there that, you know, that the body cannot respond because... But that is it, you know, the body does not react because it is too weak to react. But you know, the HIV test, there are so many what we call panels of tests. One is the antigen, one is the antibody. Not only that, but also the virus. That's the reason why we have to have what we call a confirmatory test, because this confirmatory test is definite only for HIV. So if a person comes with HIV positive, say, no, have another test. If not, 2 or 3 tests should do.
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. It's very informative and there's a lot that we can learn from it. I'm asking this from a communication perspective. What roles is the church doing in terms of communicating this certainly very useful information? Like things, examples, do you have websites where you have this information?
Yeah.
Do you have like social media campaigns where you've got maybe a Facebook page where you put this information in terms of for people to know this kind of information? What does
Yeah, we have actually a site, www.aidsministry.com. That's the one that we're using right now. But unfortunately, because there are only 2 of us right now in that office, we need to have somebody. If you have somebody who could help us, we need to help us, especially with the website, because there are so many materials that we need to update, yeah. But yes, at the moment, we are lacking when it comes to that. And I wish that. And the other thing is that, well, the General Conference is sending me to different parts of Africa. I've been to several parts of East Africa, West Africa, Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Liberia, you see. Because we realize, you see, that the next round of HIV can be actually in West Africa. So Nigeria is actually number 2 in the world with its incidence, and it's growing. And then number 2, Cameroon. It's also fast growing in Cameroon. And number 3, Ivory Coast. See, comes to Liberia, I don't know why, but they said because of the American influence, a lot of sex, men having sex with men. Liberia is also coming up. See. But we are also servicing. East Africa has had quite a fair share of our visitations with them. Yeah. And also especially Southern Africa, because I used to be working there and I used to double between AIDS and also the health ministries before we had an HIV coordinator. Watson, if we still have time, it's fine with me.
Maybe the last question from Pastor Dan Amanya.
Thank you so much, Doc. What is the vision of the fight against AIDS now? I mean, what's the update of the fight against AIDS? Is there hope for success, or things are just worsening?
That's why they have what we call these goals. By 2020, 2030, they call it the 3 goals that 90-90-90, that's the one from the WHO, UN AIDS, that 90% of the people right now, only about 51% of the people who are infected know about their status. 51%. It's a long way to go. We hope to have it at 90%, and that all of these people who are actually suffering, 90% should be getting ARVs, because when you give ARVs, then it decreases the possibility of you transmitting the virus. And of course, the number 3 is that people who are going to undergo viral or antiretroviral therapy should have their virus suppressed to undetectable, because if you actually have undetectable levels, then the chances of you transmitting the virus is very, very negligible. And that is the case also for women who want to get pregnant, you see. We be sure that the person or the partner who has HIV should have actually undetectable virus, which is 1,000 copies. Okay. But that is the general outlook for WHO and UNAIDS. But really, as a church, we have to also reach out to the other places, because AAIM is being what we call funded by the 3 divisions of Africa. The rest of the divisions in the world are not getting the services. If they want to have our services, then they have to put in their request and put in the funds for this. We're just so thankful for the 3 divisions in Africa that have put in the resources to be able for us to do this campaign. But we need to reach, because China has 1.2, I think. United States has 1.5. Russia also has something like 1.5. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you so much for your questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Llaguno. Now we are going to sing our anthem or our theme song, and then we are going to pray, after which we will disperse until we meet again in the morning, 7:50 a.m., so that we can continue with the rest of the presentations as they are in the program. So,
shall we stand? Sing. A merry heart, do it good like a medicine, like a medicine is a merry heart, but a broken spirit dryeth the bones. A merry heart, do it good like a medicine. Blessed words are as a honeycomb, fly to the soul and to the bones. Proverbs 16:24. A merry heart, doing good like a medicine, like a medicine is a merry heart, but a broken spirit dries the bones. A merry heart, do it good like a medicine. Blessed words are as a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones. Proverbs 16:24.
Let us pray. Our divine everlasting Father, we thank you for this hour that we have come through the end of this program for today. Father, we thank you for the presenters. We thank you, Lord, that you have blessed us today. Father, we pray that all of these messages we've heard, that, Lord, they will be a blessing to our life and our continent, Africa. We pray to God that all are going home tonight on the bed, and as we lie down, Lord, we pray that the power and the presence of your Holy Spirit will continue to rest and abide with us. Thank you for being with us tonight, for we ask and pray in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being such a wonderful audience. And so tomorrow morning, let's make every effort to be here by the time the program starts. God bless you. Have a good night rest. God bless you.